In a world where the material often overshadows the spiritual, it is crucial to remember the power hidden within simple objects of faith. Robert Francis Prevost, known as Pope Leo XIV, the current head of the Church, has repeatedly emphasized that even the most humble items used in prayer possess a spiritual value that can easily be lost through careless handling. This is not superstition, but a reminder of the sacred connection between humanity and the divine. In his sermons, Pope Leo XI relentlessly calls for mindfulness, stating, "Everything dedicated to God belongs to heaven, and what belongs to heaven must be protected with diligence." Rosaries, scapulars, crucifixes, medallions, and religious images that accompany us in daily life become extensions of our souls, absorbing prayers, tears, pleas, faith, devotion, and spiritual quests. Transferring these items to others can create an invisible portal, disrupting the intimate bond between the believer and the sacred. The spiritual world is real and demands discernment. Rosaries used during worship, or a crucifix consecrated by moments of deep prayer, are not merely objects, but silent witnesses to spiritual battles unfolding in the unseen realm. Lending personal prayer items might seem like an act of kindness, but without spiritual understanding, it can lead to undesirable consequences. Imagine someone using your blessed rosary with neglect, mockery, or disbelief. This not only desecrates the object, but can also negatively impact your spiritual life, depleting hard-earned grace. Pope Leo XIV urges us to reverence. In the simplicity of sacred objects lies a power that the modern world does not understand, but which the saints knew very well. Cherish your sacramentals, care for them, and use them as spiritual weapons. This is not selfishness, but a manifestation of zeal and mature faith. Have you ever considered the significance of holy water? It is not merely a symbol or an ancient church custom. According to Pope Leo VI, it is a true shield against evil, a blessing that carries the power of the Holy Spirit and the cross of Christ. This is precisely why it should not be lent out or used frivolously. Many, driven by good intentions, offer holy water to friends, relatives, or even strangers, but Pope Leo XI warns against this. Holy water is a sacramental, and its efficacy depends on the faith and reverence of the one who uses it. Consecrated by a priest, it is intended for sacred use, to ward off evil, purify spaces, and strengthen faith. By giving away water that has been used in your prayers, accompanied blessings in your home, and perhaps been sprinkled with specific intentions to another person without due care, you deprive yourself of protection and risk desecrating it. Pope Leo II teaches that consecrated objects and elements should be handled with reverence. Holy water should be kept as a silent shield in daily life, not as an amulet, but as a bridge between the visible and the invisible. Anyone who uses holy water without faith, in mockery, or out of mere curiosity can turn a blessing into emptiness and protection into danger. Therefore, the advice is clear. Have your own holy water. Use it with devotion, but do not lend it out like ordinary water. Doing so can disrupt the order of spiritual forces in your life. Holy water, when used with faith and respect, can transform spaces, liberate individuals, and protect homes, but it loses its power when handled carelessly. There is a spiritual principle that Pope Leo VI firmly emphasizes in his sermons and teachings. Resources dedicated to God no longer belong to us. The sum set aside for donation as a tithe or alms becomes sacred and must not be lent to anyone, even with the best intentions. Pope Leo XIV warns that touching this money is akin to touching the altar with unclean hands. Once you have promised this amount to God, even a temporary diversion of it, with the intention of returning it later, is a form of spiritual infidelity. What is intended for God's work must be offered with readiness and faithfulness. Delaying or redirecting it means questioning your commitment to the Almighty. Many believe there is no harm in borrowing a sum designated for tithes, with a thought of returning it next month, or using money intended for charity to solve urgent problems, promising to repay it later. But Pope Leo XIV reminds us that this is not just about numbers, but about inner obedience, mature faith, and trust in divine provision. According to recent sermons, the spiritual poverty prevalent in many homes stems not so much from material lack as from simple unfaithfulness. What then is the desecration of a sanctuary? It is when a person, by infringing upon what belongs to God, opens doors to financial troubles, spiritual discord, and even curses that hinder their prosperity. These funds have a special purpose: to feed the hungry, support the church, and help the needy. To use them for other purposes is like turning away from Christ asking for water by the roadside. God's justice begins with faithfulness in small things. And if even the small consecrated things are not honored properly, how can great blessings be expected? Therefore, under no circumstances should funds intended for God be lent, used, or redirected. They do not belong to the individual. Recognizing this fact opens the way to abundance, spiritual protection, and genuine financial well-being. There is an unspoken yet highly significant teaching that Pope Leo XIV clearly articulated in his speeches. Certain clothing is not merely a piece of fabric, it is an adornment of the soul in moments of closeness with God. When a person wears special attire for prayer, mass, worship, or spiritual retreat, this item begins to retain a living spiritual memory. Lending such clothing to anyone without due consideration means creating a breach for defilement to enter this sacred space. Pope Leo XIV affirmed, "Objects that have touched the sacred must remain within the sphere of the sacred. They cannot be returned to the mundane." This seemingly simple phrase reveals an important principle. Everything intended for God must remain inviolable. This applies to gestures, offerings, and also to what covers a person during prayer. Perhaps one has never thought about it, but the clothing worn for mass or silent adoration absorbs one's devotion. It accompanies the person through tears, pleas, and moments of grace. It is imbued with faith. And, as the Pope teaches, there is a difference between spiritual and mundane use. Blurring these spheres weakens the meaning of personal dedication. Lending such clothing might seem harmless, but by doing so, one can inadvertently give away a part of their spiritual intimacy. And this has consequences, not because the clothing itself possesses magical properties, but because neglecting spiritual things opens a space for confusion, disrespect, and even unseen attacks. Pope Leo VI warns, everything touched by faith must be kept with special diligence. What has been consecrated by love cannot be treated as ordinary. Therefore, one should think carefully before lending a shirt worn for a retreat, a veil for adoration, or an item consecrated by tears and blessings. Respect for sacred things begins with small decisions, and protecting this clothing is a way to honor one's own history of relationship with God. There are items that cannot be shared without spiritual consequences. One of them is a Bible with personal notes. This might seem like an exaggeration, but Pope Leo XIV, with his characteristic wisdom, reminds us that the Word of God is not merely a dead letter. It is alive, dynamic, and works uniquely in every heart. When someone delves into another person's notes, they intrude upon that individual's inner world. Throughout life, people mark verses, record dates next to promises, highlight words that brought healing, and fold pages that lifted them from despair. A Bible with notes is a silent chronicle of a spiritual journey. It holds falls, rises, pain, and spiritual victories. It is almost a sacred diary. Pope Leo XII recently stated, "The Bible is a portable altar, but when we write in it, it becomes a living prayer." Therefore, one should not lend their Bible like an ordinary book. It contains revelations intended only for the owner's eyes. The Pope also warns against desecrating what is intimate in one's relationship with God. One must not treat carelessly what has been a source of comfort in difficult times. By lending out their Bible, a person risks seeing it handled with inattention, lost, forgotten, or even judged. After all, someone reading another's notes might not understand the context or feel the depth of a prayer written in tears. A personal Bible is a relic, and as such, it must be protected. It is spiritual memory in paper form, a reflection of one's history of relationship with heaven. If there is a desire to share a Bible, it is better to lend a neutral book without notes. But a personal Bible containing marks and entries must remain inviolable. Pope Leo XIV concludes, "The word written in the heart is stronger than that engraved on stone. Guard diligently what God has revealed in silence." Many perceive a candle as a simple item for illumination or decoration. However, a blessed candle, especially one consecrated by a priest, possesses a spiritual power that many underestimate. Pope Leo XI, always attentive to the signs of the times and the importance of sacramentals, reminds us that sacred objects are not magic, but visible signs of invisible grace acting in the soul and in the home. In moments of deep spiritual turmoil, or when the soul is tormented by sorrow, a candle lit in prayer becomes a symbol of Christ's living presence, illuminating the world with his light. It is not merely a decorative element, but a sacred object, a sacramental capable, with sincere faith, of repelling evil, granting peace, and strengthening the prayer connection both personally and within the family. Carelessly lending such a candle can turn into a serious mistake. Pope Leo VI urged us to treat sacramentals with special diligence and reverence. Disregard for sacred things, according to him, leads to a gradual loss of the sacred in our lives. A blessed candle certainly belongs to this category. It is not an ordinary object. By passing it into the hands of others without knowing their true intentions, we risk encountering its use without proper faith, with disrespect, or even for selfish purposes. Such a candle should remain in the home, like a silent guardian of grace. During prayer, especially before sacred images or during periods of spiritual trials, it becomes an invisible shield, warding off darkness and bringing peace. It is not an item for exchange, but a gift to be carefully cherished and respected. If you have a candle in your home that has undergone an exorcism ritual, do not lend it. Pray with it, value it, protect it, for not everything of spiritual value, surpassing human understanding, should be accessible to everyone. There are objects that we carry not only on our bodies or keep in our rooms, but also in our hearts. Medallions and holy images, symbolizing personal devotion, are not merely religious attributes, but living testimonies to the sacred history of the soul's relationship with God. Pope Leo XIV, showing pastoral care, emphasized that faith manifests in gestures and symbols, and many of these symbols are embodied in small items filled with love and devotion. A medallion you wore during difficult times, an image of the Blessed Mother that accompanied your night prayers, a small crucifix you held while weeping in pain or giving thanks for grace bestowed. All are imbued with inexpressible spiritual value. Lending these items, even with the best intentions, can disrupt the intimate connection of faith and protection. Pope Leo XIV insisted on the necessity of reviving reverence. He warned, in an era when the sacred is treated with indifference, those who neglect holy things subtly invite evil into their lives. Medallions and personal holy images are spiritual shields, created by the prayers, sufferings, and hopes of those who wear them. They cannot simply be passed on to another person. To lend a medallion that has accompanied you on your path of faith is like giving away a part of your spiritual history to someone who may not understand or appreciate it. This differs from gifting, which is done with conscious intention and discernment. We are speaking of those items that still accompany you, possessing deep and unique value. They are an extension of your journey with God and the saints. Keep them diligently, kiss them in prayer, take them with you into spiritual battles, but avoid lending them, because they are not just things, but personal relics of your faith. And, as Pope Leo VI reminded us, faith is not a subject for discussion or thoughtless sharing. It is lived, protected, and witnessed with courage. Among the many ways to embody one's faith, one of the most personal and significant is a spiritual diary. It records deep experiences, cherished joys, secret thoughts, quiet requests, and answers understood only by God. This is a direct dialogue between the soul and the Creator. Therefore, according to Pope Leo XIV, a spiritual diary is a kind of tabernacle of words, where the most intimate matters between a person and God are preserved. Many saints kept their spiritual diaries secret throughout their lives. For example, Saint Faustina's diary was published only after her death and contained mystical revelations, confessions of weaknesses, and experiences related to the supernatural. When we keep a spiritual diary, we do so not only to preserve memories, but also to entrust to God what we cannot always express aloud. Pope Leo XIV emphasized that silence before God should be accompanied by internal listening, and that recording these experiences is a form of continuous prayer. He taught that words written in silence can be as powerful prayers as those spoken with fervor before the altar. Therefore, a spiritual diary should not be lent, even out of curiosity or friendship. Handing such a diary to others can lead to misunderstanding, judgment, or even desecration of something sacred. Every word written in it has a deep meaning, marked by tears, faith, temptations, and victories that are fully understood only by God. Irresponsible disclosure of this content can open doors to mockery, misunderstandings, or even curses, as ancient spiritual mentors warn. A person's inner world is a sanctuary requiring careful handling and protection. A personal spiritual diary appears as a confession of the soul, etched on paper. If a desire arises to share its contents, let it be under the guidance of a spiritual director capable of helping to strengthen faith. It should not be treated as an item to be casually shared. It should be guarded as a priceless relic, preserving the history of one's relationship with God. In an era when everyone seeks publicity, when the personal becomes public domain and is often judged, silence becomes a mighty armor, a reliable shield protecting the soul's most intimate corners. Pope Leo XIV emphasized that silence is not merely the absence of words, but a special form of prayer, contemplation, and spiritual protection. He asserted that in silence, the soul finds refuge, and evil loses its power. By keeping the most intimate prayers, deep reflections, and spiritual revelations secret, one creates a safe space where God can act unhindered, away from worldly commotion and external influences. Silence is not a sign of weakness or evasion, but a manifestation of wisdom and strength, an invitation for divine grace to manifest without interference. Pope Leo XIV warned against the excessive dissemination of information, especially about spiritual life and religious beliefs, as this can open doors to negative energy and evil intentions. Not everything should be made public, for silence protects faith and preserves its purity. In practice, silence acts as an invisible shield, protecting against others' judgment, envy, and temptations. It is a barrier that prevents negative forces from exploiting human vulnerability. Concealing certain aspects of faith, prayers, and sacred objects prevents the dissipation of the spiritual power they carry. At the same time, Pope Leo XIV reminded us that silence in the face of evil, when used to condone it, is a sin. However, silence aimed at protecting one's inner life is a manifestation of love and wisdom. The ability to discern when to speak and when to remain silent is a valuable gift that must be developed. Therefore, silence should be cherished, for it is filled with God's presence. It serves as protection, preventing faith from being weakened by external factors, and as a way to strengthen the soul for life's trials. Faith is not an object that can be lent, not merely an accessory for display, or a means for bargaining with the world. Pope Leo VI, in his teachings, emphasized the importance of living faith genuinely and personally, without transferring one's spiritual power to other people or circumstances. He asserted that faith cannot be lent or exchanged. It is lived, nurtured, and defended with courage. Lending faith means depending on someone else's faith, seeking security in others' beliefs, or pretending faith to please. This dilutes the true power that God desires to see in every soul. The Pope emphasized that faith is an intimate and profound relationship with God, requiring daily commitment, prayer, and sincere practice, not a temporary or superficial transfer. To live by faith means to accept one's own challenges, experience moments of doubt, and strengthen hope. Pope Leo XIV stressed that true faith is born in a heart that accepts it with conviction, not in a mouth that merely pronounces it. Therefore, he urged every believer not to leave their faith in the hands of third parties, but to build it and live it fully. This teaching is an urgent call to spiritual responsibility. One should not allow their faith to be a forgotten heritage, an empty ritual, or an item of convenience. It must be the foundation of all actions, the light guiding one's steps, and the shield protecting the soul. The Pope also warned that lending faith can lead to confusion and weakness, opening doors to doubts and negative influences. Living by faith, conversely, strengthens the spirit, brings inner peace, and repels evil. Therefore, it is necessary to affirm one's commitment to God and not lend one's faith, for it is the most valuable treasure a person possesses. One should live it in every moment, in every action, in every prayer. Faith is not a temporary loan. but an inexhaustible source of life and salvation.